Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the fifth webinar of the CCB's Qctr. CCB, the Center for Cybersecurity Belgium, Qctr, the quarterly cyber threat report, the CCB Qctr. Today we have again quite some interesting guest speakers. We have Charles Carmichael, Bart van Oudenaar from Mandiant. We have Alan Liska and Dimitri Smiljanec. We also have Kurt Baumgartner, and finally, but certainly not least, Dr. Paul Vixie. The first one on stage that I didn't mention yet is our own director, Mr. Miguel de Bruyker. Miguel, can you join me on stage, please?
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to you all. Hi, Pedro.
Hi, Miguel. Yeah, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Pedro de Rijker. I'm the head of CCB Citrus, the CTI department of the CCB. And who are you, Miguel? We always say the director, but I assume that you're already a few years the director of the CCB. Did you not start that thing from scratch a few years ago?
Well, to be honest, yes, I had the honor to start up the CCB a bit more than 6 years ago from scratch. Then we were with only 2 people. Now we are a little bit more. So yes, the honor was mine and it still is. So thank you.
Okay. And what are you bringing us today? What may we expect from your short introduction?
Well, it will be a very short introduction. I just want to emphasize or put the emphasis on some small ideas, a few things to think about. But I think the other presentations about ransomware and supply chain, everybody is waiting for that. So it will be very short, my introduction.
If you say that you have new ideas, I'm already getting nervous, but okay, that's my problem. The floor is yours, Miguel.
Thank you very much. So let me put on my small presentation on the screen. Let's check. Yes, this is working. So, and I hope this is working. Yes, here we go. I think, to be honest, that we are at the beginning of a wonderful story, and we are really.
1 second, Miguel. May I ask you to, on your right side, on the down the screen, you will see that you can turn off the notifications, because every time there is an emoticon on the screen, we hear a bloop. So if you can turn that off.
I'll try to put it off. I think it has been put off.
Okay, thank you very much.
Now I have to get back to my presentation. So I honestly think that we are at the beginning of a wonderful story where the digital transformation will be the engine to move the world to more prosperity. Honestly, globally, prosperity will be made faster, stronger by this digital transformation. But on the other hand, that digital transformation depends a lot on trust on this digital infrastructure. So in order to be able to make sure that we can have trust in and we maintain trust in that infrastructure, I think it is important to certainly have response capabilities, to have detection capabilities, to make sure that everyone is properly securing his environment. But on the other hand, I also think that we should decrease the vulnerability of the internet and the digital infrastructure as a whole. Now, it is important, of course, in doing so, to maintain an open and free and anonymous cyberspace. That is very important. That is crucial. But on the other hand, I think we should put on additional layers based on quality of service, on liability of specific services, and maybe we will also need some form of digital identity in order to maintain that liability of systems. But very important, without breaking down the idea and then the possibilities for the open and free and anonymous cyberspace. Why are we so vulnerable? Well, first of all, we can build up the awareness programs that we want to, but we will not be able to change, and luckily we will not be able to change the human being. We are a bit ignorant. There is some form of greed in all of us. And yes, we want to believe that we have just won a lot of money. And on the other hand, technical experts, we can tell them to make sure that their environment is properly secured. But let's be honest, you have to implement that many measures in order to achieve that state-of-the-art security, as GDPR is mentioning, that it has become almost impossible not to forget one or the other security measures. So we have incredible challenges. And for instance, we have created a mail address, suspicious@saveonweb.be, and for 4 years we're calling up the population to send us suspicious emails, to forward us suspicious emails. And for the month of August, we received on average 13,000 emails a day from the Belgian population. It's a small country. And this allowed us to identify over 6,000 suspicious links a day. In our database, we have over 2,000 completely malicious domains. And we are pushing almost more or less 50 malicious domains to the Belgian anti-phishing shield, where we say these domains are for 100% malicious. There's no good content on these domains. And so they are redirected. And in this way, we are sending out warnings like the Google Safe Browsing, for instance, warning page, but we are doing that also on national level over 50,000 times a day. So if we don't reduce the vulnerability of the infrastructure, these numbers will keep going up. We have over 70,000 of vulnerable systems identified in our country, and it is incredibly challenging to notify the owners of those vulnerable systems. And this is what we want to do. We have changed the notion of spear phishing into spear warning. We want to identify vulnerable systems or infected systems in our country, and we want to know who is behind or who is the owner of that system, just in order to notify him, to warn him, your system is vulnerable, do something about it. And here you see a small graph, and Belgium is the dotted blue line. And there you see that for instance, early March, when the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability was published, you can see that early March, percentage-wise, we were not doing the best job and compared to, for instance, the European Union. But then we started notifying the owners of the systems. Spear warning, notify them, your system is vulnerable, do something about it. This is what you can do. And then you see that a few weeks later, we were amongst, let's say, the best students in the EU class. So to end up my story, we are at the beginning of something wonderful, but it's based on trust. And in order to achieve that, I think we should manage vulnerabilities. And vulnerabilities are human and technical vulnerabilities. So that's a bit my message of today. Thank you very much and enjoy all the other presentations.
Okay, thank you very much, Miguel. We have one question from Matthias Neuville, who asks if the numbers that you just presented, if they are public, are they available on our website, or will they be available on our website in the future?
I don't think we publish those numbers in a public way, but I can be quoted on these numbers that I presented today. I can be quoted on that. We don't regularly publish those numbers for the moment, but they can be used publicly.
Okay, but say at the moment, if somebody is interested in having the numbers, they can request it via a simple mail sending to cert@cert.be. Okay, Miguel, thank you very much for your presentation and your time. And I think we'll see each other very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, next on the agenda, two people, two specialists from Mandiant, Charles Carmichael and Bart van Oudgaarden. Gentlemen, may I ask you to join us on stage, please?
Hey, how's it going? Can you hear me okay, Pedro?
Yes, Charles, I hear you loud and clear.
Perfect.
Hi, Bart.
Hallo, dag Pedro, dag iedereen.
Okay, I think for Charles it's a good morning, and for Bart it's good afternoon. You're both in a different time zone.
That's right.
Charles, can you short introduce yourself to the public?
Yeah, sure, Pedro. Thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm Charles Carmichael. I'm a senior vice president and CTO at Mandiant. Been with the company for 10 years, and I work with folks like Bart and hundreds of other incident responders to help organizations respond to security incidents. And we also try to help organizations become more resilient to attacks. So it's good to talk to you all today.
Thank you. Bart, same question for you.
Yes. Well, obviously, many of you know me, Bart van Outgaren, working here in the region near Brussels. And so really focusing on, let's say, the incident handling. So doing the digital forensics, the analysis of incidents. So getting involved with customers when they're in that crisis moment.
Okay. And what are you bringing us today, Charles?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about ransomware and multifaceted extortion, and really what our learnings are dealing with hundreds and hundreds of organizations that have unfortunately dealt with these intrusions. And we're going to try to separate some of the fact from fiction, talk about some of the lessons that we've learned, and maybe talk about some of the things that are a bit controversial around paying threat actors and what the benefits are and why organizations do it. So we'll share a lot of personal firsthand learnings on what we're actually dealing with as we work with organizations.
Sounds great. Sounds very interesting. Looking forward to it. The floor is yours, gentlemen.
Excellent. Give me 1 second. Let me just load up these slides. All right. And just real quick, can you see my slide deck in full screen mode?
Yes, we can, Charles.
Perfect. All right. So I can't see anybody. So if there's any questions or if anybody wants to chime in, please just shout it out, or Bart or Pedro, please let me know. All right. So from an agenda perspective, there's really 4 things that Bart and I want to cover. The first thing is just talk about the background of ransomware and what is multifaceted extortion. And I think a lot of folks that are familiar with ransomware sometimes have a legacy understanding of what it is. And it's very different today. And so we want to talk about what it actually is today based on what we're seeing. We'll talk about what the common intrusion root causes are. So how are victim organizations getting penetrated? We'll share with you a lot of learnings and observations around these incidents that we're actively dealing with. And then we'll talk through payment considerations and learnings. And look, we have lots of conversations with organizations, both during an incident, but also prior to an incident, as boards and C-level executives are actively thinking about what would they do. And I'll tell you, there's certainly a lot of assumptions that executives have before an incident that are very different than what the realities are when you're actually dealing with an incident. And so we'll share some of those considerations and those learnings. All right, so I want to talk a bit about just the evolution of ransomware. And I realize most people probably have a good general common understanding of what it is. But I think it's important to do a little bit of level setting so we could talk about what we believe the problem is today. So ransomware, to us, became prevalent back in 2013. It's when we started seeing CryptoLocker. And CryptoLocker, for those of you that may not be familiar with it, was an encryptor that was distributed via email, where when people opened up malicious attachments or clicked on links and went to malicious websites, the encryptor would encrypt all of the files or the important documents, maybe image files, things like that, on the computer of the person that opened up the attachment. And what we started seeing with future iterations of CryptoLocker and other variants was that it wouldn't just encrypt files on the direct computer that were that the encryptor was being run on, but it would also try to connect to already established network shares and encrypt files on file servers. What we found in the early days was that the ransom demands were pretty light. They were about $500 or so. And the reason for it being light is because the threat actors didn't know if they were impacting a multi-billion-dollar corporation or if they were impacting a grandmother who was trying to get photos back of their grandchildren. And so they asked for low money, but they were hoping to get paid in bulk. And so as you kind of progress in the years, in 2015, we saw a group called SamSam, which started conducting intrusions where their initial intrusions were fairly opportunistic. So they looked for vulnerabilities of that were commonly known that they were easily able to exploit in mass. And then once they exploited that, they put their hands on keyboard and they conducted further intrusion operations into those victim organizations. And then they deployed an encryptor. And what was notable about this group was, it was a few things. One, they knew who the victims were because they were actually conducting manual intrusion operations there. And so what they did was they defined extortion demands that they believed were commensurate with the amount of money that these victim organizations were willing to pay. And so we started seeing, extortion demands of about $15,000 or $20,000 or $25,000, and started going up. And it was, in today's day, hearing an extortion demand of $25,000 seems really light, but back in those days, it felt pretty high. The other thing that was notable about this group was, and it sounds really strange to say this, but they provided pretty good customer support. So when victim organizations tried or paid and then got a decryptor, and if that decryptor didn't work, they actually did a pretty good job of apologizing for the non-working decryptor and then fixing it and then providing an updated build so that victim organizations could get their data back. Well, so fast forward by a few years, a lot of people took note of the model that the SamSam group had demonstrated, and they started conducting manual intrusion operations, and then started defining extortion demands that they believed were commensurate with the organization's willingness to pay. And so in 2018, we started seeing the shift from financially motivated criminals that historically broke into companies to steal credit card data. They started monetizing their intrusion by deploying ransomware. And a good example of that is a group that we call Fin6, which is a group that's known for being responsible for some of the most high-profile credit card data breaches in the world. They pretty much stopped stealing credit card data and mostly focused on deployment of ransomware encryptors. And so that happened in 2018, and we started seeing pretty big game intrusion operations and extortion demands. And so at that time, we started seeing about six-figure extortion demands. So about $250,000 to $500,000 to about $750,000. And again, at the time, that was big money. And it seems low today as we kind of continue to see the evolution of multifaceted extortion. What changed in 2019 was the introduction of a concept of stealing materially sensitive data from victim organizations and then shaming those organizations. And that was really started by the Maze group back in the end of 2019. And a lot of other groups, they started taking note of the concept and the actions of stealing sensitive data before deploying encryptors so that you could have, you could engage in what we now call multifaceted extortion. And I think that's really important because a lot of companies, they're able to recover their data through their own backup processes and their systems, the resiliencies that they already have. But the dynamic really changes from an extortion perspective if you're threatening to release sensitive data. And we'll talk about why that's important and why victim organizations are paying. So as I mentioned, we call today's threat multifaceted extortion. In addition to stealing data from organizations before deploying encryptors, we see threat actors attempt to coerce victims to pay through a number of different mechanisms. They engage mainstream media at times, and sometimes they don't need to do that by reaching out to mainstream media anymore. They could just use their victim shaming sites, and we'll show you what those victim shaming sites look like. And by advertising that they hacked into a particular company, and by showing an example of stolen data, they can get journalists to publish stories about their intrusions, thus amplifying the pressure and the coercion against the victim, and trying to convince them to pay. We also see threat actors conducting distributed denial of service attacks against organizations. We see them reaching out to partners of the organizations or customers of the organizations and extorting them. So today, nowadays, from our caseload data, the average extortion demand for one of our clients is usually in the seven-figure range. So usually a few $1 million. For the larger organizations, we're seeing extortion demands in the tens of millions of dollars. So the highest extortion demand that we've seen so far is $70 million for one of our clients. They didn't pay it, but it was a publicly announced extortion demand of $70 million. The highest known publicly known extortion payment is $40 million, which is pretty substantial. And we are aware of many organizations that have paid multiple, tens of millions of dollars in extortion demands, unfortunately, because they felt they had no other choice, but their incidents have not become public. So I'd like to ask Bart if you could talk through just a typical attack lifecycle. Mm-hmm. And I realize this slides may not be loading. Oops, sorry. There we go.
Yeah, exactly. So in the way that these ransomware operators really work is not much different than an APT actor, right? Would target your organization. So yeah, obviously they need to get that first foothold within the environment. And when they're targeting an environment, and I'll talk about some of the common ways they get into a network, they typically try to look around for credentials, right? Higher privileged credentials that they can then use during the distribution of the encryptors within the environment. But also using those privileged credentials then to search on file shares or on mail servers. So in that first phase, they're trying to, what we all know of, a technique called lateral movement, right? Trying to get themselves familiarized within the environment, trying to find out where are the file servers, what does the domain look like, and the running tools like AD-Find or Bloodhound, much like your APT actor would also need to understand your environment. Once they get to that understanding, as I mentioned, trying to elevate their privileges and then to prepare for the next two phases. So obviously, what Charles has talked about is the third phase, and that is what is the most destructive, what is also immediately noticed by many of the victim organizations is when the encryptors take effect, and that's when we have massive destruction in the environments. But before that phase, that is the data theft phase, and that is really something that has emerged more recently, the last 2 years. We'll talk about that, some of the groups that are in that kind of naming and shaming and getting that data from the environment, using that as an additional mechanism to put organizations under pressure. From an investigations perspective, I think that's also where our clients, the organizations that I work with, focus very much on. Yeah, obviously, from the last phase of the intrusion, when the encryptors take place, that is the most damaging, but also the least interesting from an investigative perspective, because that's obviously highly automated and spreading around the environment to cause as much damage as possible. But we try to focus much more on the earlier phases. How did they get in? Do they still have access? How did they achieve that initial foothold? Obviously, to avoid a repeated event. Did they take data? What kind of data? What is the impact of that data theft to the organization, and so forward? Next slide, please.
Yeah, and actually, Bart, just one other thing to add. I think it's one thing that's pretty interesting about current modern day multifaceted extortion events is that it's very rarely conducted by a single group of operators. Nowadays, there's so much collaboration across a variety of different groups. There's a term that the industry calls ransomware as a service, where you essentially have groups that will do things like build the ransomware encryptors and build the naming and shaming infrastructure. But you have different groups that maybe conduct the initial intrusion. Maybe they're just focused on conducting spear phishing and exercises, and then you have a different group that might actually conduct the the internal network compromise and the privilege escalation and the data theft. So the collaboration amongst the various groups is really interesting to see how that's really taken off. And if you think about really the way that financially motivated criminals monetize their intrusions now, everybody's advertising and looking for people to deploy a ransomware and to conduct multifaceted extortion operations, because again, that's just so much more lucrative than stealing credit card data nowadays.
Yeah, and what kind of amazes me from an investigation perspective is the speed that all of this is taking place. But there are some variations on this. So these are some of the victim naming and shaming sites. You see examples here, like the one on the left from the Maze operators, the one in the middle from the ReEvil group and Doppelpaymer. But these are things that they put online to put that additional pressure, and then let's say these sites obviously are being monitored by many in the security industry, but also by journalists, and they would use them to leak some part of that data that they have obtained during that earlier phase.
Yeah, and what's actually really interesting about the engagement with journalists is in the past, before these naming and shaming sites existed, the threat actors had to establish a relationship with a journalist and establish some credibility with them before that journalist would publish a story. But now they don't really have to reach out to a journalist. They just have to post and advertise on their own naming and shaming site. And usually some journalists will read it and write a story. But there's definitely a lot of controversy around, does it make sense to write stories? Because you're essentially amplifying the message of the threat actor.
Exactly. Yeah, so obviously, how did they get in, right? How did they establish that that first foothold? It's kind of, let's say, similar like you would protect any organization. It's similar in the way that an APT actor or any other threat actor would get access to your environment. Obviously, you still have the email-based phishing that would take place, but there's also the other trend, right? Where, and that is what Charles also alluded to, is the use of commodity-based malware. You would think that it's just a trick bot or just a Quake bot that you would get infected with as an organization, but kind of also we see the handoff between a, let's say, more commodity malware operator to a more sophisticated threat actor that would then monetize and then breaking into an environment to kind of capitalize on that first initial foothold that was established with more, I would say, common malware like a TrickBot or QuakeBot. Once the attackers realize, once the TrickBot operators realize the environment that they're in, they may have that collaboration with another threat actor.
And what's actually really interesting about this, Bart, is many years ago, our incident responders, when we would see TrickBot, kind of think of it as it's commodity malware. We'll write it up, but it's not that big of a deal. And now, unfortunately, commodity malware has become so important to us, because the botnet operators, we know, are collaborating with other organized criminals that do more disruption. But in limited cases, we're also seeing collaboration between botnet operators and nation states. And again, I just want to be clear, it's in limited. We have limited evidence of that, or limited observations of that, but it is happening right now.
Yeah, then let's say exploitation of known and patched vulnerabilities, right, or patchable vulnerabilities, I would say. We had our share of high-profile vulnerabilities this year, unfortunate, certainly also during a global pandemic. And you see that these ransomware operators, rarely they develop a zero-day, which is definitely one of the possibilities that could get in, with a kind of race to make use of those vulnerabilities. And then shortly after a patch or a proof of concept code is being made available, the race to kind of make use of that to establish that foothold in as many organizations as possible. And then, any external facing system that you have, right? VPNs, I mean, we had like Citrix, we had Fortinet, we had many other systems. We had the Exchange vulnerabilities that we were facing earlier this year. But certainly these VPN systems, these remote desktop systems, you make them available for your workers, for your staff to get access to your organization. Certainly if they're not protected by multi-factor authentication, it makes them very vulnerable and allowing the attacker to pivot within your environment without breaking into any system. And then lastly, as I've mentioned, 0 days definitely remains a possibility, but I would say it's rather limited. These cyber criminals are rarely being able to develop or use a 0 day in the first place before it's been publicly announced. But there have been certainly some cases where this has happened. Yeah,
and a few notable cases would be the data theft and extortion going on with the Excellion TA product, and we saw the exploitation of the Sonic Wall VPN vulnerability, and there's been a few others, and it's actually interesting to see the volume of 0 day vulnerability discovery by criminals and exploitation in the past 12 months. It's more than we've ever seen before, but when you look at the grand scheme of things, the totality of the ransomware, the multifaceted extortion that we see, 0 day vulnerability and exploitation accounts for the smallest percentage of the total intrusion, initial causes.
Yeah, and then let's say specifically from an incident response perspective, right? So the cases we've been working on, you typically see the threat actors being aware about the defenses that the blue teams put in place. So you will see them, or when we analyze after the fact, the attacker's activity leading or showing traces that they're getting access to a system, and they would first disable the antivirus detection system. or they would first stop the logging services, right? So to allow login to, for example, a Splunk system. The reason why they do that is to decrease the chances of discovery, specifically at the later stages of their intrusion. And so they want to have the freedom to deploy their encryptors as much as possible, because of course that causes the highest possible damage within an organization. And then the encryptors themselves, pretty much the way that they deploy is by using legitimate tooling that is available in the environment. We've seen WMI or PSExec, both either built-in or Microsoft developed remote administration tools that they use, and reusing those privileged credentials they've gained earlier in the attacker lifecycle and reusing them to deploy across all of the systems in the environment. Also sometimes used is like software deployment technologies, or even like GPOs. I've seen used tools like Lambdesk, right? The same software that you would use to deploy a new patch or a new piece of software across all of your fleet. Then they would use the same system and then to deploy their encryptor. And I think also what's interesting is the timing when this happens. So not very. Sometimes they actually deliberately pick a time to deploy these ransomware encryptors in bulk within the environment just right after midnight, or before a public holiday, or the evening of a public holiday, just to make sure that once they deploy, they have a maximum effect as possible. Unfortunately, some of the organizations that I've helped out with have been affected by ransomware. In some cases, rendered about 80% of the IT infrastructure in organizations unusable.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing that Charles also spoken about. What kind of continues to amaze me is the speed that they work, right? So sometimes from the initial foothold until that encryption took place, sometimes takes just a few days. But as Charles mentioned, there's also some cases where it's literally a couple of months between the initial foothold, perhaps like a TrickBot or QuickBot, and then another group perhaps takes over and then, let's say, completes the mission.
Yeah, that's right. And maybe just to comment on a few groups. So for example, Fin12, it's a group that we just recently published a lot of information on. When they get access to an organization, and sometimes they get the initial access themselves, but a lot of times they collaborate with another group we call UNC 2053. And UNC 2053 pretty much focuses on phishing victim organizations and then handing over access to different groups. But once Fin12 has access to an environment, they're really good, and they tend to focus on that victim and as quickly as possible attempt to get domain admin rights and then deploy encryptors across the enterprise. And sometimes that happens within a few hours or so. So it's just really hard to be able to defend against a group like that just operates so quick. Whereas some other groups, as Bart mentioned, we'll see the totality of the incident, sometimes lasting months, because somebody was phished on, say, January 1st, and malware was installed on their computer, but the access didn't get handed over for maybe another 3 months or so. And then once the access was handed over 3 months, maybe the intrusion period might be, a few days or a few weeks. But we actually see a lot of threat actors, or historically I've seen a lot of threat actors, work in parallel and compromise multiple organizations, and so kind of take their time and essentially elongate the intrusion process at victims so that it might be 2 or 3 weeks before they actually deploy the encryptors. And what that does for us is it gives us a better chance to help organizations catch the intrusion earlier on in the life cycle before the attackers have the ability to deploy encryptors. And so, there's benefit for us when threat actors work in parallel and elongate their intrusions. It's more difficult for us when a group like Fin12 conducts their intrusion and then escalation and the deployment of encryptors within a matter of hours. The other thing I wanted to highlight that Bart mentioned is just the way that the encryptors are typically deployed. I think there's a common misconception that ransomware encryptors self-propagate and operate in a worm-like fashion and just start propagating all over the network. There are certainly some variants that do that, but the mass majority of the enterprise-wide extortion events that we deal with, the encryptors are deployed through some kind of batch scripting, ps-exec, WMI. So the attackers are basically creating a batch file or typing in some commands to deploy the encryptors across the enterprise, as opposed to the software themselves, through the encryptors moving around the network. Excellent. So the next thing I want to talk about are extortion payment considerations. And I'll tell you, look, I know there's a general perception and a view that you should never pay criminals. You never want to give in to terrorist demands because you're going to encourage further bad behavior. And look, I believe that for many, many, many years. And what I learned was about 8 years ago, I had some clients that ended up paying an extortion demand against my guidance to them. And I actually saw relatively positive outcomes. And so in about 8 years ago, I was seeing a lot of data theft from organizations and the ask of payment in order to not publish the data that was stolen. And I saw at least what was temporary positive outcomes where for some of my clients that paid, that information wasn't actually published on the internet, at least not immediately. And also what I noticed was some of my clients were paying because threat actors would escalate their attacks and cause disruption if not paid when asked initially. And again, those days were very different than what we're dealing with today. I mean, today you see the data theft and you see the ransomware deployment happening in very short order. And then you see the extortion talking about both, the payment for, a decryptor and then also a promise to not publish data. So anyways, things have really changed over the years. But as we think about, why people pay and what are the considerations, and again, we talk to both organizations that are actively dealing with incidents, as well as organizations that are anticipating potentially needing to deal with this in the next few years. We ask ourselves the questions and we ask them the questions. How quickly can you recover your systems and data on your own? Can you leverage your backup infrastructure? Can you restore, virtual machine snapshots or virtual machines through snapshots? And can you do that on your own? And will you get any speed if you pay the threat actor? And what we find is actually a lot of our clients that do pay, they actually have pretty good backups. The problem is every single server in their environment was taken offline in a matter of hours. And maybe it wasn't fully taken offline. Maybe the encryption process just started and didn't finish before the victim organization shut off the servers. But figuring all that out and being able to restore all your systems and data can be a very lengthy process. And so some of our clients choose to pay for a decryptor so they could accelerate the speed in which they recover their systems and data. And by the way, you're not recovering every single server all at once. You're thinking about a tiered process. So, how do you get your tier 1 systems back online? Because those are the mission critical servers that need to get back online first. And by the way, usually it takes, days to get your tier 1 systems back online, depending on, of course, the severity of the incident. When you're thinking about tier 2 systems, other important systems and servers that exist, that might take, many days or maybe weeks to get back online. And then the tier 3 systems could take weeks or months. So again, depends on how bad the severity is. But again, a lot of organizations will pay for a decryptor because they want to accelerate that process. The next question you ask is how reliable is the threat actor? And I realize that probably seems really silly to a lot of folks, but we need to recognize that threat actors realize that there is a business model that they have to comply with in order for them to continue to make money. And if they get paid and don't provide positive outcomes to victim organizations, they're not going to get paid very often in the future because a lot of security companies will keep track of the reliability and the credibility of threat actors. You also want to understand, did the threat actor steal data before they deploy the encryptors? Today, most of the times, you should assume that they did steal data. It's not always the case, but usually they will steal data. One notable exception of that is Fin12. We've seen them steal data once before, but we just don't see them in general stealing data from organizations before they conduct disruption. You want to understand, does a threat actor still have access to your network? Usually the answer is yes, they do. They usually have some backdoors in the environment. They usually have access to multiple credentials, maybe every credential, or at least every password hash, so they could potentially access the network through a VPN, maybe a single factor authentication VPN or a Citrix server, something that provides remote access. You also want to understand, will cybersecurity insurance cover the claim? Many years ago, we used to see people just making the assumption that cybersecurity insurance would cover the claim. and they thought it was free money, so they would just get the pay the threat actors. And essentially, what happened over the years is that the insurance underwriters realized that there's so many claims that are happening that it's becoming it's a tough business for the insurance companies to be in. So nowadays they're making it much harder for people to get renewals of their policies at the same rate that they were paying the previous year. So the rates are going to continue to go up now that there's really broad coverage for cybersecurity insurance. And then in the U.S., what's really important to understand is a threat actor sanctioned by the United States Department of Treasury. So meaning if they are sanctioned, it is illegal in the United States to make a payment to the threat actor. And so this would apply to other companies that also do business in the United States. What gets really challenging is understanding who are you actually paying, because you never really know exactly who they are. But you do a due diligence process. You look at whether or not the Bitcoin wallet or the name of the person is on a sanctioned list or an OFAC list, and you don't pay them if they are. But again, you never know exactly who you're paying. So what have we learned? As I mentioned, from organizations that pay, the threat actor deploys multiple backdoors. So you can't just pay the threat actor and hope they walk away and never come back. Usually they don't come back, but technically they could, because they almost always have multiple backdoors in the environment. I know there's a perception in the industry that if you pay a threat actor, it will encourage them to re-extort you or for other threat actors to come after you. In today's business model over the past 2 years, our observations are the opposite. What we see is when you pay a threat actor, they don't come back, or they are less inclined to come back and re-extort you because they don't want to break the business model. That'll change at some point in time, but for the past 2 years, we haven't seen re-extortion by the same threat actors. We have seen the same victim get compromised by different threat actors and re-extorted by different threat actors. We do not believe that those threat actors knew that the victim had been compromised in the past and had paid an extortion demand. And in fact, we actually believe, based on visibility that we have, that most threat actors probably wouldn't go after the same organization that they know has paid, because the likelihood of that victim organization paying again is much lower. As I mentioned, you never know who you're paying, so some threat actors are sanctioned, and so that's always a risk. We also find that most threat actors are reliable, at least the name brand ones. And as I mentioned before, there are no guarantees that if you pay a threat actor that the stolen data will actually be deleted. We often get some kind of proof of deletion, but that doesn't mean that they deleted all the copies of the data that they have. My guess is in the future, probably in the next 12 months, we're going to start seeing some situations where threat actors are paid to not publish data that was stolen, but that data will end up getting published anyways. And the reason why we think that's going to be the case is because there are so many different groups that are involved in these intrusions nowadays, and a lot of different groups that have access to the data. There's a lot of conflict amongst the groups that are conducting these intrusions. They don't feel that they're getting paid their fair share. Some of them aren't getting paid at all because certain groups are getting in trouble with law enforcement, and money is getting reclaimed by government, and a variety of other things that are happening. So my anticipation in the next 12 months, we'll start to see some threat actors where the group in general has been paid, but the specific operators have not been paid, and they'll get pissed off and they'll end up publishing data on a forum or through social media. We provide a number of resources. We've always done this. I highly recommend for organizations that are looking for better ways to prevent a ransomware incident. Just read the white paper at the top. This is essentially the Mandiant playbook that we use on day 0 when we conduct an investigation with an organization dealing with ransomware. These are, there's a lot of recommendations that we provide that could be implemented before an event to minimize the impact or the likelihood of an intrusion. We mentioned Fin12. We just published a lot of information about them last week, and then there's a number of other resources that we have available. So I will stop sharing the deck and just open it up for any questions that the group has.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. Taking a quick view to the questions channel. Carlos and Brooke, you should have access to the question channel. If you see any questions that you want to pick out and to answer, please feel free to do so.
Sure. I'll just go in order real quick, and I realize we're getting close on time, so I apologize to the next speaker if we're going a little bit over. So the first question is, has Mandiant Incident Responder seen more cases of wipers or other malware disguised as ransomware? Short answer is no, not yet. Yes, there's notable cases like NotPetya, which everybody thought was ransomware. To us, it was very clear that it was a wiper very early on. As you started looking into that, we don't see that very often. We do see extortion by government-sponsored threat actors that we believe are trying to throw a false flag to look like it's a criminal operation. We see that in limited cases, but that has been going on since 2016 or so. For example, we saw APT28 conduct intrusions where they wanted it to look like a criminal operation, but it was very clear to us it was a state-sponsored operation. The next question is, what's your opinion on Foggy Web? Do you rule out having been compromised via this backdoor at this time? So our perspective on Foggy Web is it's very, very interesting. It's a very interesting malware family. It is used in incredibly limited instances. So if you see it in your environment, that probably means that congratulations, you're an incredibly high value target, because that really only exists in some of the very, very few places. It's incredibly interesting. It's a very novel piece of malware. Microsoft did a really good write-up on it. One thing that I really want to emphasize is it's essentially a technique that allows an external person to mint SAML tokens for any user to access essentially any resource of that organization from the internet. So if you have the ability to access a Foggy Web backdoor as a threat actor, you have the ability to assume any identity within the federated environment that the identity provider gives you the opportunity to mint tokens for.
Yeah, I think I just want to add on that point is, of course, Foggy Web is a very different, let's say, threat actor group that is behind it, right? It is really focused on much more in the espionage sphere rather than on the ransomware sphere.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and by the way, so the only group that we've seen use Foggy Web is a group that we call UNC2452. They're very active right now in Europe against government entities, so it is a very important group to be aware of. And Foggy Web is a very important malware family to be aware of. But again, it's been seen in such limited usage, which, by the way, it is a testament to the capability of the threat actor. Let me just see.
What I suggest, gentlemen, is because we are running out of time.
Sure, no worries.
The questions, they stay in the questions channel. So if you still have a little bit of time after the presentation, please feel free to answer them.
Sure.
We'll see how much questions we can answer, but I'm afraid that I really have to close
no problem.
The presentation here. Other people are waiting, and I try to stick a little bit to the agenda.
Totally.
Anyway, thank you. I know that you're busy guys, Charles and Bart. Thank you so much for making time for us, for being with us, and for giving us this very interesting insights in ransomware incidents. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Let's close a few streams here. Well, okay. That was our second talk, the third talk for this afternoon. Once again, we have people from Recorded Future among us. Once again, they were bringing us a story about ransomware. May I kindly invite Alan and Dimitri on stage, please?
Hello, Pedro. Hello, everyone.
Mr. Dimitri.
Hey, everybody.
Alan, good afternoon, gentlemen. Dimitri, as usual, good to see you again, my friend. It's always a pleasure to work together with you. Alan, thank you for being here. Dimitri, can you give a short introduction about yourself to our audience, please?
Absolutely. So my name is Dimitri. I'm an expert threat intelligence analyst at Recorded Future. My daily job is to dig ransomware, investigate the groups, find the secrets, and alert our customers.
Alan, same question for you.
I'm Alan Liska. I am an intelligence analyst at Recorded Future. I'm the Robin to Dimitri's Batman. So I kind of take his lead and just say, holy encryption, Batman, and provide comic relief.
Okay. What is the topic that you are bringing today?
today we are going to talk about RAS and the rise of the ransomware extortion system. And give me a second, then I will share my screen.
I don't know if it's Dimitri or Ellen, but I can hear in the background that your sound is on. So every time there is an emoticon on the screen, we hear that pop sound. You can turn it off on the right side on your screen. You can turn it off that we don't hear the pop sound anymore. Otherwise, it will be annoying during the presentation.
Got it. All right.
Are
I just
we
turned it off, so I
ready
hope
to
that
go?
works. All right. And let me go.
Let's see. Let's find out. Okay. I see that everything is ready. The screen is shared, so I think that we can start. The floor is yours, gentlemen.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it and really appreciate the invitation today. So today we're going to talk about ransomware as a service and the rise of the ransomware extortion ecosystem. Very, very nervous following Charles Carmichael. Certainly one of the best out there in dealing with ransomware. But we're going to do our best to continue his great presentation. So I want to start off with a little bit with some of the stats that we've seen and letting you know that kind of ransomware has been a little bit weird in 2021. We've seen 12 ransomware groups, at least 12 ransomware groups that have had law enforcement action taken against them or very publicly retired in 2021, which is a number that we hadn't seen before. The problem is right now ransomware is so popular that that every time one group disappears, two other groups pop up. To date, this year, we've seen already over 2,000 victims posted to ransomware extortion sites. That's already more than all of 2020. And again, that number is going to continue to grow. We saw a $40 million ransom paid by CNA Financial back in May, which is the largest known publicly reported ransom. And then on the other side, we've seen ransom payments fluctuate a lot this year. They've gone up and down, throughout the year. A lot of that, I think, has to do with some of the new actors coming in and starting with low ransom demands. As they get better, then they start making higher ransom demands. But it has been just a very weird year overall for ransomware. And today we're going to start by talking about ransomware as a service. So RAS offerings generally work by allowing attackers to get into the ransomware, allow other attackers to get into the ransomware business. The ransomware operator gives their affiliate an access to their control panel. They can generate the executable, and then the ransomware operator takes a cut of the collected ransom payments. We used to see most of these services operated in top-tier underground forums. Not so much anymore, although still they are. And then we have seen a big growth in the number of and diversity of RAS offering that's helped accelerate ransomware attacks. So Dimitri, I know that you're constantly finding new RAS offerings, and it seems like every week now that you find a new one. Is that right?
Yes, Alan. There are about 40 groups, 40 brands, ransomware brands, who possibly operated by the same individuals. I've seen instances when one threat actor operates panels of several groups, and he sees visibility into like all the groups. So unfortunately, they grow like mushrooms and they spread like COVID.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So again, because ransomware actors are making so much money, we're just seeing more and more people come into here, and it's really hard to keep track of all the different groups that are out there at any given time. So one of the first ransomware as a service offerings was back in 2016 with Stempado. You could buy the executable for $39, and that was really it. All you got was the executable. Wasn't very good, easily detected, but it showed that the model could work. Then we jumped to GanCrab, which is really one of the first truly successful RAS offerings. started in 2018. They retired in mid-2019, claimed to have made $250 million from the ransomware. That number may be dubious, but at the time, they were definitely wildly successful, and they accounted for most ransomware attacks that were happening at that time. One of the first RAS services to go to an invitation-only model. And Dmitry, can you explain what the sort of that invitation-only model is?
Well, they're trying to avoid when researchers like me joining their circles of trust and figuring out their TTPs, secrets, and targets. So they're trying to make sure that the next recruit, next affiliate is black hat, a hacker who is not gonna share intelligence with the world. So invite only means somebody has to vouch for you.
Got it. So we see that a lot of the RAS sellers use some of the same sales techniques as multi-level marketing companies. They refer to their customers, the ransomware operators refer to their customers as affiliates. We see them talk up the potential money that they could make if they join. They highlight other ransomware successful attacks or successful ransomware attacks, and really seeing cultivating that image of themselves as bold and brash. Dmitry, you did a really good interview with Unknown, who was the threat actor behind Soda Nakibi, and when he talks, he really is boastful and proud of everything that he's done. There's like no fear in him, is the way that comes across in the interview. Is that about right?
Yeah, Unknown wasn't a technical guy. He was a leader, a manager, a spokesman. His statements were crazy. Sometimes he bragged about having access to a nuclear reactor or Navy cruiser. Well, of course, these claims have to be supported with at least something, but he made the image of REvil. And right now, when REvil came back with two former developers who are in charge now, they don't look like REvil anymore. They don't have Unknown, who was the image of this group.
Right. And that's one of the things that is really important in understanding how a lot of these RAS operators work. A lot of it is based on the sort of the leader, the personality of the leader, and what they're able to push through. And there's a difference with somebody like Unknown versus the two developers that are now in charge of REvil. Do you think that makes a big difference overall, or no, it just depends on the ransomware?
It does, Alan, because even threat actors are shitting on REvil right now. They don't respect these two developers and they don't accept them. You can see it's public, it's visible on forums. They absolutely hating him.
My favorite kind of drama is ransomware actor drama, where the members of the group are digging at each other, because I'd rather them doing that than attacking victims. So we see a lot of the RAS success based on interconnectedness, which is interesting. So the RAS operators relied heavily on the dark web forums for advertising. And I think, Dmitry, to some extent, even if the word ransomware is banned from these forums, a lot of these threat actors are still managing to get their advertisements out in these forums. Is that right?
Yes, Alan. And moreover, they recruit new affiliates, they buy accesses, they trade accesses, they offer $3 million for a zero-day exploit. Yes, $3 million, that's how much they have to buy your exploit. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. We're used to thinking of the zero-day market as, recently as primarily a government market where it's nation states involved. But some of these RAS operators have more money than some nation state, hacking groups. So they're in those same markets that some of the government or the state-sponsored groups are. But in addition to the dark web forums, we have also seen RAS operators rely on security researchers. Some security researchers get directly called out by RAS operators. We saw Brett Callow over at MCSoft, mentioned publicly on one of the ransomware group's blog posts as somebody that you shouldn't trust or shouldn't hire to do your ransomware recovery. We also see this with security press. We see a lot of ransomware operators who will reach out to reporters who are known to cover cybersecurity issues and say, hey, look at the victim that I have on my extortion site. You should write about this because it's really important. So they really rely on that interaction in order to try and get information out about their victims and about their about the data that they're trying to dump out there, all in the service of trying to increase the likelihood that they're going to get paid. Oops. This is targeting patterns. Dimitri, do you want to talk about the slides you have here?
Yeah, absolutely. So the data was obtained from public blogs. The numbers represented here are the numbers of publicly shamed victims, uncooperative victims who refuse to pay, plus some of not public victims that I was able to identify via the negotiation chats and other means. So as we can see, this is 2020 and 21 data. You can see, you don't have to read these letters. They're unreadable. I just brought it here to show you that they are opportunistic. They don't focus on the industry. They don't focus on particular industry. Well, we can see that construction and other industries kind of got more attention. But overall, actors are opportunistic. They spray and pray that the target will get infected. Some of the groups are focusing only on 100+ million revenue victims, like Black Matter. They want to go big only. And they also pick a path of least resistance. What that means, if a country implements very strict rules for paying a ransom, and they know it, they will say, we don't go after this country. Let's go do Australia because they pay good. So I've seen this in their during direct engagements and stuff. I've seen actors picking a country that easily pays, and we can see the image on the left bottom. Half of known victims are from the United States. So why? Because they pay, because they don't pay, or because they have money? Likely because they have money. And that's about it about this slide. Alan?
And then, some really great information about Qctr. Do you want to talk about them?
Sure. Qctr is top-tier group located in Russia. So Qctr, former Ryuk. Ryuk was the core of the group, the old school guys, very professional. Qctr is a public face of Ryuk, is the new recruits, is ransomware as a service model for the previous organization. These guys are ruthless. They are attacking hospitals. They have over 100 members, and they actively recruiting today, right now. They're getting bigger. The meeting between presidents didn't really affect them, but I really hope that the changes that are probably in the shadows that we don't see right now, that they will affect this group because they are big. They were #1 in August. In September, Lockbit took over the first place, but Qctr is still huge in a number of total victims. They are the world leader in ransomware.
So when you say they have 100 members, are you talking about 100 affiliates, or is that 100 people that are part of their, for lack of a better term, their employees, so the negotiators and so the contractors, the initial access brokers?
Yes, it's both. It's not just hackers.
Right.
They have supplemental services that help the group to thrive and achieve success. I'm not going to describe all these services that are helping them, but over 100 people, believe me.
Yeah. So, and I think that's one of the things that I think is really important for people to understand. These groups are big. It's not the proverbial 400-pound dude in his mom's basement. This is a complex, this is a complex organization, if you will, of different, with different roles and different activities that are involved in putting this together, which is why they're able to be so prolific, because there are so many people carrying out these attacks. Is that right?
Yep. This slide, a piece of negotiations. I caught it a couple days ago, so it's not public victim. Why I brought this up? Because after the victim paid, Conti, good people, right? They shared the TTPs, and they shared like mitigation strategy, and we all can benefit from this. Just look at this 10 steps, which make sense absolutely for the security professionals. I'm sharing because I feel like one company paid for this knowledge, but we all should benefit from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are, a lot of the same advice are the kind of things that we as security analysts have been telling people to kind of do for years. Now, some of them, they're just not realistic, depending on the size of the company. They're not going to be able to implement, an EDR system and a DLP system, because all of that costs a lot of money. But, segmenting your network better, better email filtering policies, those kind of things are the kind of things that, again, if we were sitting down and telling people how to protect against ransomware, we'd give those same kind of advice. And then you want to talk a little bit about Lockbit?
So once Revol shut down after the Cassia attack, it shut down just because unknown, their leader, disappeared. We still don't know for sure what happened to him. We know a couple of versions, which are one crazier than the other. But what happened was, once the infrastructure went down, dozens of affiliates were left without employer. They're like, what are we doing next? And they had to pick between going to Conti or join Lockbit. I made this slide about 2 months ago. And right now we can see that affiliates actually picked Lockbit, because Lockbit in September was the leader in attacks, in number of attacks, and they are very proactive. They hitting everything they can hit at this moment.
Right. And I really like the comment that you have down there, that the only thing you have to do is get access to the core server, which in this case, they mean the domain controller. And Lockbit 2.0 will do the rest. And it's fascinating because the batch scripts that they include with the executable that do things like disable your antivirus software, automatically delete your shadow file copies, and do that all from the domain controller. So basically push that out to all of the workstations and servers, and then push out the executable. So it's really fascinating the way they've kind of developed this ransomware to make it as simple as possible. But it also shows how important the domain controller is and Active Directory is in general to these ransomware actors. Going back to the previous slide where we talked about Conti saying, watch out for pass the hash. You can do that because of Active Directory. So really, there's got to be an emphasis on securing your Active Directory, your Active Directory, and especially your domain controller, because the ransomware actors are very familiar with that and they're taking advantage of it.
Just to add a little bit to Lockbit, they have another piece of malware that is called Stealbit, and that's infiltration. That's the thingy that will go and search for shares, for document folders. You set it up, you make filters, and it pulls everything by itself. So fully automated. To be a Lockbit affiliate is likely very pleasant, but this is a crime.
Yeah, and not as efficiently, but we saw the same thing with the manual that was released from one of the Conti affiliates a couple months ago, where they actually, most of the manual was in Russian, but they actually had a list of keywords. So they said, there's instructions. Here's how you do a list of all the files on the file systems, and then look for these keywords in English in those file systems. So again, the RAS operators are trying to make it as easy as possible for the affiliates to make sure they exfiltrate the right files. Otherwise, that they're less likely to have successful extortion attempts.
Well, another important slide. After the infection, Lockbit will put this picture on every locked desktop. On every machine, you will see such a picture. What's important on this picture? You kind of already know you're locked, you're done, but they talking not to the CEO or CISO. They are talking to employees. Because look, would you like to earn millions of dollars? Our company acquires access of networks of various companies. So what they are doing, they creating insiders. They put in a thought in employees' heads for the future. Not right now, this company is locked, but the employee will move forward. Employee in 3 years will be in a different company, and he will remember that there is a way to make millions of dollars. I'm not saying employees are corrupt and everybody will do this. No, 0.01% will think about this. But we have to keep in mind the risk exists.
Absolutely. And I mean, we've already seen that. We saw that earlier this year with the Tesla employee that was straight up offered $1 million to install ransomware on the network. Now, obviously, that didn't go the way the ransomware actor planned. But yeah, I mean, this is, again, when you have tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that some of these ransomware groups do, you can afford to pay insiders to install software, to get you the information you need so that you can gain access to the network or whatever it is that you want to do. And your favorite, you want to talk about?
My favorite, Black Matter. Yes. Why it's favorite? Because Recorded Future called it and not just said, oh, there is a Black Matter. We provided actionable intelligence to our clients. Our clients benefits from Yara rules, Snort rules, Sigma. I also provided an interview for the public. Some people don't like my interviews. They say I glorify cybercrime. It's their opinion. I disagree. This is human intelligence. I gather intelligence. I gather opinions. Sometimes I gather patterns, how they speak. So this is very important. Look, the end product for Black Matter from Recorded Future was a research that attacked the threat actor group from different angles. We went inside, we saw their panel. We got the malware sample before anyone else even saw the infections. We created protection, mitigations before they started attacking companies. So that's the value of Recorded Future, and you are welcome.
Yep. So I want to talk a little bit about how the extortion ecosystem has expanded over the last year. So because of ransomware as a service, extortion has become more important than ever. And a combination of that, and I think Charles hinted a little bit to this earlier, that a lot of organizations have gotten better at backing up their software, so they don't necessarily need to pay the ransom in order to decrypt files. Now, sometimes it turns out that may be cheaper, and that is that's a business decision. But what we're seeing is the ransomware actors moving from beyond just stealing files and posting them to extortion sites, but they've created a whole new ecosystem. So really the idea of this double extortion goes back to 2019 with the ransomware attack on Baltimore. The actor behind Robinhood ransomware got mad when Baltimore refused to pay the ransom. And so they started releasing stolen bits of data on dark web forums and Twitter. But the Maze ransomware was really the first to codify this idea and build a ransomware extortion site. And other ransomware groups soon copied. So at this point, almost all hands-on keyboard or manual ransomware actors have a extortion website where they publish stolen files, but it's gone well beyond that. So we have the sensitive files, but we've also seen where ransomware actors contact clients to encourage the business to pay. We just saw this with the Allen Independent School District in Texas, where the ransomware actor behind that ransomware attack emailed all of the parents and said, hey, we have the stolen files, we have sensitive information about your children, and we are going to publish that to our extortion site if you don't force the Allen Independent School District to pay. So, and it's not the first time for that. And I think, Dimitri, you've seen where they actually will rent out call centers to handle a lot of this work for them. Is that right?
Right, absolutely. As I mentioned before, top tier criminal organizations can afford supplemental services. There is a guy in a group, his name is Qctr, on Exploit Forum. You probably saw him. He was bragging, he was crying that several groups didn't pay him millions of dollars. So this guy runs that supplemental service. He helps with pressuring the victim. He helps to make smooth payments. He likely has some ties with IR responders, negotiators. So these people exist and they help to make the transaction smooth.
Yeah. We've also seen ransomware actors try and use cyber insurance policy. In fact, again, part of the exfiltration process is looking for information about the cyber insurance policy because they can turn around and use it in negotiations. We've seen ransomware actors go after, threaten to report the victims to the stock exchange or sell that information to insider trade, inside traders so that they can take advantage of a potential stock drop. Now, our research has shown that generally stocks don't drop because of a ransomware attack. I think because they happen so frequently at this point that everybody's like, okay, another ransomware attack. And it doesn't, unless the ransomware attack is particularly bad, it doesn't really impact the stock price barely in the short term at all, but certainly not in the long term. We've seen ransomware actors threaten to launch DDoS attacks. And then we've also seen them use sensitive files that are stolen from executive endpoints. So we know that some ransomware groups will go after specifically executive endpoints and look for sensitive files that could be interesting blackmail material. You've seen that in particular with before they disappeared before Revel, right, Dimitri?
Yeah. They went too far, shaming CEO, like talking about his private pictures and disloyalty. I don't know. It's too dirty. They going crazy. They will go far. They will sell their mother to get this cash. These actors are out of their minds.
Yeah, absolutely. And then sort of the latest one is don't call the cops. We've seen several ransomware actors now post information on their extortion site saying not to, that basically like a bad 90s kidnapping movie. If you call the cops, your data is going to disappear. We're going to, delete your key. If you call in a ransomware negotiator, we're going to do this. Now, a couple of the groups that are doing this, as Charles mentioned in the previous presentation, are tied to Evil Corp. And, therefore, if you pay the ransom, you're paying a sanctioned entity. So there is some self-interest in doing that. They really don't want you to talk to any experts before you pay them. But what do you think about this sort of latest strategy of, if you call the cops, we're going to delete your data and delete your key so you can never recover?
Well, regarding these advices, I don't know. We should call cops. We should let law enforcement know the first that there is an incident. We should not listen about these advices. We should invite professional negotiators who will help you to go through this crisis. So these advices are terrible because it looks like we disrupting their activity. It looks like they hurt and they trying to figure out new ways to keep making those money. It looks like some of our actions actually work, and threat actors suffer. So let's keep doing what we're doing until they all cease to operate.
So don't take advice on how to negotiate with ransomware groups from ransomware groups. So again, these different types of extortion schemes that are going and carrying on are only going to get worse. Ransomware actors, as Dimitri said, they're finding new and more evil ways to try and force extortion, or try and force payments from their victims. And we expect that trend to continue to grow because, basically anything they can do to make money is what they're going to try and do. And I think that is all we have slide-wise. So I'm going to stop sharing. And happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Okay, Alan, Dimitri, thank you very much for this presentation. I had one question, but it's already answered, Alan. I was going to ask you about groups that threatened their victims, not informing law enforcement or no publications or no negotiators being involved, but that was already answered. And I have a second question for you. This week we discussed an article in our team regarding somebody that published an article about killware. I don't know if you have read about it, but in fact, after reading that article, you could conclude that the crime will stay the same. Probably they will attack organizations with tools and techniques that we see already often, but they will attack organizations that, like hospitals. And if those organizations are attacked, then that might result in people getting killed. We have seen during the COVID period that some of the ransomware groups were that gentle that they said we're not going to attack any hospitals because of the COVID situation. So we have a group of people, criminals, that say, okay, we are gentlemen, we will just attack the organizations that can pay and are not involved in medical healthcare or whatever. And now we have that article that says, no, probably in the near future, we will see that some criminals will evolve to killware. Do you have any indications that this is true and that we may expect this kind of attacks? Dimitri?
Well, yes, thank you, Pedro. I took that attack on a hospital where a baby died personally. My heart was bleeding. I hate those guys, and I'll do my best to find them and make sure they pay for this. The thing is with killware, we can call it anyways, but when a person dies because of malware, we need to bring it up. We need to talk about this. We need people to understand and hate them. We cannot let these actors hide behind the computers and say it's cybercrime. No, your actions ended up with death. It's unacceptable. It must be brought to the president's meeting again. These people who made this attack are known. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think that we will see more of this kind of attacks that organizations?
Unfortunately, the world develops. We will have Internet of Things. Your heart device will be connected to internet. Your diabetic device will be connected to the internet. They will play with this hardware. They will shut it down. People will die. That's going to happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, part of it is the ransomware actors don't know what they're doing when they get in a lot of these healthcare networks and other sensitive networks. So they don't know what they're shutting down. They're just shutting down because they want to make the money. And so people will continue to die. And there may even be some that are evil enough that are like intentionally trying to kill people to prove a point. So whether it's by completely by accident or intentional, yes, I think we'll continue to see more of these, because so far there haven't been any real consequences for their actions, and that is the problem. Unless you believe the fantasy stories about Revel, which I don't think either one of us are unknown. I don't think either one of us believe any of the sort of the fantasy stories. But there, right now there are no consequences no matter what they do, and that's a problem. And then you have to think about, when you talk about ransomware actors not saying they won't attack healthcare. We saw this in a slightly different version with the recent Black Matter attacks on the grain cooperatives, where the grain cooperatives went in the United States. The grain cooperatives went in the negotiation and said, "Hey, we're part of critical infrastructure." And Black Matter's like, "I don't think you're part of critical infrastructure." So some jackass in Russia gets to determine, who is critical infrastructure and who isn't, or who is a healthcare provider that's not worth attacking and isn't. So it's not just it's not just what we think of healthcare. It's they get to determine whether or not it's truly healthcare or not.
Okay, thank you. And one final question. Both of you are very active on the dark web, where you follow up conversations between criminals. Can you tell us something about how the criminals react to the US initiative about ransomware by bringing together a number of countries that will battle ransomware groups? Does that make the criminals nervous? Does that create new initiatives? Will they change their modus operandi? Will they change their TTPs? What can we expect from that?
Pedro, we saw them reacting before the meeting. They're like, "Okay, president's meeting, let's not attack United States." It's true. Revel posted that on affiliate panel. You probably saw it yourself. So after JBS attack, when they tried to attack Brazilian company, but it was United States headquarters, they were like, "Well, Americans going to blame us regardless. So no limits, go attack. But governments don't pay. Don't attack governments." So that was the message. Right now they reacted. They increased attacks. So I can say there is a change. Attacks increased. That's how they react. They don't care. We did not impose cost. They laugh at us, and they will keep doing this. They're recruiting more people so they can spread attacks, more COVID.
Yeah. I do think with the cooperation, we are going to see more costs imposed, but I just think that, the ransomware actors have gotten away with it so long. They assume that whatever comes out of this meeting that's happening or that's happened this week, is going to be nothing. So I hope that they're proven wrong. I think we all hope that they're proven wrong. But I think there's an assumption that, okay, great, government's met, they still can't do anything to stop us. So we'll see whether or not that turns out to be true.
Yep. Let's wait and see. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much for sharing your insights about ransomware. Looking forward to meet you in person, maybe next year. And would say have a great day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care.
Okay. It's 3:43 here in Belgium in the afternoon. We have scheduled a little break. We are only 4 minutes overtime. That's acceptable. So let's say that we're gonna have a short break, a 10 minutes break. So we will start or restart again 5 minutes to 4 Belgium time. I'm not going to translate it to the different time zones because we have people from 45 countries in this webinar. So let's say we see each other back in 10 minutes. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the second part of the CCB's quarterly cyber threat report event. Still on the agenda, two top speakers for this afternoon. We have Kurt Baumgartner, who will bring us some information about how to make donuts. And we also still have Dr. Paul Vixley on the agenda. First on the agenda now is Kurt Baumgartner. Kurt, please, can you join me on stage, please? Oh. Hi, Kurt.
Hello, Pedro.
Good to see you back, my friend.
Good to see you. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. Long time ago that we have seen each other in Singapore. The good old days.
Yes.
Huh?
Very close.
Kurt, I know you, but not everybody probably who is watching us knows you. Can you give a short introduction about yourself, please?
Yeah, currently I'm a principal security researcher with Kaspersky's Global Research Analysis team. I've been a part of the team since 2010. I work out of Boulder, Colorado. Prior to that, I was with a startup that was acquired by Symantec, and I was with Symantec for a couple of years. I got my start in the network load balancing field of all places back in the late 90s. I focus now, my research focuses on targeted attacks, analyzing and reversing complex malware, and really what it all ends up being published, all of that ends up being published. I generate content for our private reporting and our threat intelligence reporting service.
You just mentioned Kaspersky Great Team. What exactly is the Kaspersky Great Team?
Well, our Kaspersky Great is a team of around, I think we're around 40 people now, and we're located all over the world. So we have people absolutely everywhere, and everyone has their own sort of blend of talents and mix of skills to add to the mix. We all attempt to provide some sort of local response for our customers and for the general discussion around cybersecurity needs.
Okay, and who is your boss again?
Yeah, the director of our team is out of Romania. Great guy, Kostin Raiu. I think he's presented here before, so
Yeah.
I would assume a lot of people have know Kostin.
The whole world knows
Yeah.
Kostin. So and Kostin is watching us, by the way. What are you bringing to us
Well,
today?
So I wanted to talk about supply chain attacks, and whenever I hear about supply chain attacks, it kind of takes me back to my childhood. And there was a particular, when I was a kid, I was always interested in how things work and how things are made. And I always think about these donut commercials that were on when I was a kid. So supply chain attacks go hand in hand with donuts in my mind for some reason.
Okay, well,
but it's more than that. I would like to take sort of a fresh perspective and a new take on the SolarWinds Sunburst attack and how highly sophisticated actors have been advancing and progressing their techniques and tactics as a part of supply chain attacks, and compare it against other supply chain attacks that we've seen over the past, in 2021, and how lesser advanced actors aren't really that capable but effective. And then what we've seen in the past, even from the higher end attackers, and how their tactics at the time simply were not as advanced as what we're seeing now.
well, I think it's time to make the donut. The floor is yours.
Yeah, right on. All right, so let me get started with my slides here. 1 second. All right, here we are. All right, so it's time to make the donuts. Again, my name's Kurt Baumgartner. I'm with Kaspersky's Global Research and Analysis team. So today I would like to talk about supply chain tactics and execution that we've been seeing in 2021 in particular. I would like to drill down on the Dark Halo SolarWinds event. And I do know that that was really in 2020, but the malware samples, the discussion, the narrative around it was really released in December of 2020, and all of it was discussed in 2021, but it was actually cut off. So I'd like to take a look at that in particular, and then I'd like to try to take sort of an objective look at comparable supply chain attacks that we've seen in the past, and to walk away with sort of a clear understanding of how we might compare and understand not only the sophistication, but other evaluation methods for looking at these attacks. So 3 topics I'd like you to walk away with after this presentation. Highly sophisticated APT are learning from past mistakes and challenges. I am not in this talk. I'm taking a look at Dark Halo and their supply chain incident, and then I'm also taking a look at what we call Hades, or the MEDoc incident back in I believe it was 2017, and comparing those two pretty much in depth. I want to look at lesser advanced adversaries and show you that they are exploring this tactic and executing it in 2021. Some are refining their execution, some are not. That may be because of the defended environments are not as sophisticated with their methods in hunting for APT. There may be a number of reasons for that, but they are not stepping up their game like other actors. And then I want to take a look at other borderline cases that sort of blur the boundary of what really is a supply chain attack, and discuss how that may or may not fit in when we're evaluating supply chain attacks. We are seeing a definitive trend in 2021, like coming out of 2020, that not only the high-end actors are leveraging the supply chain in order, well, for a number of reasons, but that we'll look at in a minute, but the lesser advanced actors continue to go after the supply chain. In particular, I want to look at an undisclosed incident that I've been calling SmudgeX. It had to do with a biometric suite and some targeted attacks there. I want to look at the Monpass incident. The actor that was a part of that we've been calling Bounty Glad, and then I want to examine some of the technical factors that went into the PhantomNet incident of this year, or of last year, sorry. And then I want to do some comparisons against the MEDoc incident in 2017, some ShadowPad stuff, what Crouching Yeti, Energetic Bear was up to with their supply chain attacks, which were very interesting because it went after industrial control system software, and then some of the Strong Pity and Lambert stuff from years past, and how that may blur the lines of what really is the supply chain. Unfortunately, all the supply chain discussion around SolarWinds, at least, the Sunburst attacks and Dark Halo, got cut off because of the very large and significant end of February, early March 2021 incident with the Microsoft Exchange on-premise 0-day that was hit globally. It was massive, so the discussion seems to have been lost a bit. So why am I talking about the supply chain, and why are and what really am I looking at when it comes to the supply chain? It comes down to pretty much everything that produces, develops, and delivers a product or service from its from its parts to the customer. So all the organizations all the way, sales teams, developers, and their shops. What I'm not talking about are if M&A occurs, if an acquisition brings in an organization and some actor gains additional access when that occurs. I'm not talking about man in the middle, not necessarily, and then contextual issues are where sort of lines get blurred.
Good. May I interrupt you 2 seconds? I see that you are trying to change your slides, but we are still looking. What we are seeing is still slide number 3.
Oh dear. There must be some delay. Okay, let's try to change that. Sorry about that. So let me turn off screen sharing for a second here. Let me try to re-enable that. See if that improves what we've got.
Now I see I think it's number 6. Slide number 6.
Slide 6. Okay.
Maybe can you try to go to the next slide to see if it's working now?
I'm going back one.
Back one.
Now I'm going forward one.
No, nothing is changing on the screen here. So.
Okay. Let me try the.
Are you using a PPT or are you using a PDF?
I was using the screen sharing with the PPT. It worked in the earlier session. Basically, I'm sharing the window. I'm advancing through the presentation, the slideshow.
Maybe it will be better to share the screen, that you use the share screen option.
Okay. So let me give that a shot here. Sorry about that.
It happens. It's a live session, so.
Always. All right. Okay, so let me start this up again here. Okay, so is that coming through?
It's coming through. 1 second. And if you can now change the slide. I'm seeing number 6 at the moment.
Okay. You see 5 right now?
No. Nope. It's not. Kevin,
Hello,
do you have a suggestion?
This is Kevin. Kurt, can you maybe just quickly forward it to me, the presentation? I can share it for you then. You can type that way.
Sorry.
See how that works. For the people who don't know me, I'm Kevin Holvoet, by the way, just popping in here.
And now is the question how we will fill up those 2 minutes, Kevin. So maybe we can share some of our statistics while Kurt is sending the presentation. So I can tell you that 740 people registered for the event. And yes, some people asked me, texting me, like did I hear right that there are 45 different countries of people from 45 different countries involved in this webinar or attending this webinar? And yes, 45 countries indeed. So that's always impressive to see that we have such an international audience. I think that Kurt has, in the meantime, has sent the presentation to Kevin.
It's going right now.
I don't have it yet, but maybe, Pedro, maybe we can start talking about Duvel. I know.
Yeah, that we can.
It hasn't come up yet.
Not yet. Yeah, it's quite.
I don't do printers really.
Does anybody has a general question for Kurt in the meantime? Something about APTs?
Yeah, if anybody has any general question, please let us know. We have an interesting remark here from Amori. Hackers from 44 countries interested in what's going on in Belgium. Yeah, they can try. No, we're doing the best we can in Belgium. I think we're doing a good job.
Well, since our Prime Minister has approved our new cyber strategy back in April, we have to try to make Belgium one of the least vulnerable cyberspaces of Europe. So that's quite a challenge.
True. Hey, and by the way, if anybody is interested in becoming part of CCB, we have a couple of
vacancies.
Open. So
that's true.
Keep them coming.
Just let us know.
Kurt, have you been able to share your screen or to share your presentation with me? I haven't received an email yet.
Yeah, I'm on a VPN right now, and it looks like email. Okay. It is connected, and it's slowly being sent. In the meantime, I also have uploaded the PDF to Livestorm.
Okay.
And that is slowly going through. It's stuck at 100%.
Yep.
Yeah.
I see that we have a question from Stefan Corbiot. Does the strategy come with more budget? We hope so. We are waiting for some news. So yeah, if we hope to get more news by the end of the week or maybe next week. So yeah, we are positive about that.
Yeah, Pedro, there's a question here from Joris Lambrecht. Are we open to contractors? I don't think we are.
Unfortunately, no, we do not.
That's unfortunate. Sorry about that, guys, or people, whatever. What kind of VPN are you using, Kurt? It's a pretty slow one, I guess.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can keep on talking about whatever you're going to say.
Yeah. Why don't I?
Yeah. Continue with your presentation. I'll see when I have it. I'll see when I get it, and I'll start sharing at that moment. All right.
That would be cool. Okay. So, yeah, one of the strange things here also is that for me, the slides are showing up as advancing, and I see the slides. So this is odd. All right. Well, so where I left off, sorry about the hiccups here, guys. Where I left, I was talking about why attackers have been leveraging the supply chain, why the tactic is becoming more and more adopted, and they're leveraging, at least in 2020, it's fairly apparent they're leveraging several key things. So pre-selected targets of interest are available. If you know a target's customers, you know at least some of your targets, some of your second hop targets are definitely in there. There's an elevated level of trust. So if your compromising say a software supply chain not only is delivery and implementation, but behavior of the software is something that already has an elevated level of trust. Sometimes those software packages are signed, and that provides some idea that there's more integrity to this package than before. And it provides sort of an extended persistence for their implant within often a valuable location. There are privileged locations for these products within networks and data centers, so that's already of interest. And then finally, these development studios and these providers, these components of the supply chain are often less well defended than the highly guarded target that you're after. So that's an unfortunate reality that we're seeing play out into 2021. So in this slide, which unfortunately you guys cannot see,
Fortunately, a lot of technical things are going wrong. That's a pity, but that's part of live events. I think that I'm taking a look at the agenda. I don't think it will be possible to have Kurt back on stage. It's the first time. It's the fifth Qctr. It's the first time that we have that kind of technical problems. Sorry for that. I don't know if Paul Vixie is already online, because in that case, I would suggest that we jump immediately to the last topic for today. Paul, if you're online, can you join me on stage, please? Apparently, he's not online yet. They are not making it me simple today. I'm thinking what the best solution would be. No, Sophie, that's something I certainly will not do. That's really a good idea. The only thing I can suggest that we do is I think that Paul Vixie will join us just in time, and that's within like 8 minutes. So I think, like Miro suggests, that we take another short break, and yeah, we can maybe have a duvel.
Yeah, I'm in contact, Pedro, with Paul. He told me he will jump online. So indeed, let's take a 5-minute break.
Yep.
And when he's up, we can put Paul on stage, and then maybe afterwards get Kurt back online if he is.
What I suggest, Kevin, we just stick to the agenda then. 25 minutes past 4, we will start with the presentation of Paul. So that means that we have another 7 minutes break.
All right.
And
cool.
Sorry once again. Sorry very much.
So somebody was asking for the Pew Pew map. As our speaker was a Kaspersky speaker, let's put up the Pew Pew map from Kaspersky. Here, have some fun.
Okay. Can you hear my voice? Yeah. Okay, cool. Guys, sorry. I apologize. Sometimes real problems with the ISP. All right. Where did I leave off? So I was talking about attackers are leveraging several key things in 2021. Among them are pre-selected targets of interest. If you know their customers, and by the way, is this where I left off? Is this?
This
Pedro?
was the slide where we ended. But to be honest, Kurt, we have a problem with the agenda. While you were offline, we told the audience that we were not expecting you to come back because you had technical problems. We decided to skip the topic because in 2 minutes we have our next guest speaker. So the only thing I can do, Kurt, and I'm really I saw your presentation during the Kaspersky SaaS conference. I was very impressed. That's the reason why I also invited you. But okay. That happens. It's the internet. It happens. It happens. No offense. But we'll discuss it afterwards. And
Sounds good.
maybe or we will set up a separated webinar for our audience in the coming weeks, or we can add your presentation to the next quarterly event. If that is okay for you?
I could share my slides for sure. And I believe we have another recorded version of it elsewhere that I could try to get to you, and maybe post a link or something like that. This is so unfortunate. I'm sorry about this, Pedro.
No, sorry. It happens, Kurt. You have given so many presentations during your wonderful career, and you just have to accept it. But maybe that's a good idea. The thing you said about recording, that's an option that we have. And we have a Livestorm CCB page where we then can publish your presentation afterwards.
Excellent.
I will certainly get back to you afterwards how we will solve this issue and how we will get your information to our audience in one way or another. Okay.
All right. Sounds good. All right. Thanks so much, Pedro.
Thank you very much, Kurt. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. Technical problems. I hope that our next guest speaker will have not the same issues. He's also based at the west coast of the United States, so I hope there are no too much DDoS attacks at the moment over there. It gives you a bad internet connection. Anyway, our last guest speaker for today is Dr. Paul Vixie, a well-known person in cybersecurity and a person that has done already a lot for the cyber community. But I think that the best person who can explain who Paul Vixie is Paul Vixie himself. Paul, welcome to our quarterly event.
Pedro, thank you for welcoming me. And thank you for inviting me to present. This is exciting.
Paul, can you give a short introduction about yourself to our audience, please?
I can. So I have been working on open source software, trying to make the internet work at all originally, and then make it scale, and especially to make the DNS scale to the global giant that it has become. About 12 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I started working on observability because, it turns out that if you have a bunch of competing security companies, one of the things that they will all agree on is that nobody should see their data except them. That turns out to advantage the bad guys a lot because nobody sees enough to make a true dent. So, about 15 years ago in one of my nonprofits, I started working on how can we get cooperative sharing and analysis of internet metadata, and how can we do it in a privacy preserving way. That's what I'll be talking about today.
Okay. And what can the people expect at the end of your presentation? What will they have learned from your presentation?
Well, they will have learned about some interesting tools that are available to threat hunters. And they will have learned that, those are available sort of by various companies commercially, but that there is a way within Europe to participate in a sort of an exchange system, a cooperative venture where a whole bunch of DNS operators all send their data to a central point, and then they each have the right to receive the data that's been seen at that central point. We call this SIE Europe. And obviously you are in Europe, and I wish I was also in Europe. I wish I could be there in person, but really that's the takeaway, is that there are steps every operator can take to participate in what I call observability. And then there are some benefits, direct and indirect, they will get if they do so.
Okay, well, looking forward to your presentation, Paul. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. Now, I saw that Kurt was having technical difficulties and that you wished that I not have the same ones, and I'm sure I won't. But I am having different unrelated technical difficulties. So I think I am ready to go. So we're going to do some slides, and then we're going to do some demonstrations. Share, share screen, and share window, and here we go. All right. So, as I mentioned, I am Paul Vixie. I am the CEO at Farsight Security, and this is something I've been working on for a long time. It's something that Farsight was actually created in order to make a viable, sustainable business to serve the community in this way. I do want to note we are not a nonprofit, although SIE Europe is a nonprofit, and so there's I'm sort of I'm wearing two hats here. So I think in this audience it is clear and maybe obvious that the DNS is the map of the internet. Yeah, I know BGP is also a map of the internet because, if you know an IP address and you want to get there from here, then you need a route, and BGP provides that. However, if you don't know an IP address, you're going to have to find an IP address somehow, and we do that by and large using the DNS. So DNS started in the mid-'80s, back when the internet had perhaps 400 very large, very expensive computers on it. And now there are billions of computers and trillions of transactions. And to its credit, DNS is still serving. DNS has grown by 9 orders of magnitude in that time. So, this is a huge success story. And it's good for us as cybersecurity people, because everything that somebody wants to do on the internet kind of requires that DNS content exist to help guide that activity. And those activities are, mostly they are cooperative. It's all about sharing information, reaching each other's resources, doing what the internet was made to do. But also every malicious use of the internet depends on DNS. And that is a huge boon to us as far as investigating those activities. Because if you get enough DNS data in one place, so that you're sort of seeing a good representative sample of the whole DNS content, then it turns out that the malicious resources that had to be published in order for a criminal to reach their victims, that will leave a trail that we can follow. And this is called passive DNS. And the reason it's called that is because we don't issue queries. If you issue a query about a potentially bad domain, the bad domain's operator, which could be the bad guy if they didn't sort of hire someone to do it, they're going to see your question. And we prefer to see these patterns without exposing any information about our investigation. So that's why passive is so important. I think I mentioned no single DNS operator sees enough of the DNS to really give them a sense of what's in there and how it relates to other things that are in there. Passive DNS data, therefore, really isn't useful until it has been shared and aggregated. And it is that sharing and aggregation that occasions this talk. Some DNS operators necessarily see that some other DNS operators are competitors. That would keep them from sharing data with each other. In other words, somebody's lawyer or CEO or managing director would often say, no, we're not going to cooperate with them, even though it would make our customers and their customers safer, because if we do, then they're going to know about us and they're a competitor. We're just not going to do that. And so a trusted intermediary can really resolve a lot of conflict there. And in Europe, that trusted intermediary is called SIE Europe. It's a nonprofit company incorporated in Karlsruhe. I am one of the 3 founders. Outside of Europe, we have a security information exchange that's built with the same technology, but it serves the global audience. But inside of Europe, GDPR is a real concern. And as a result of GDPR, we had to sort of work with the local community to build a sharing facility that was governed by Europe and would allow Europe to better observe itself and therefore better defend itself. So I want to do this briefly, and I apologize for the complexity of this drawing. Ultimately, all that matters is those 3 clouds in the middle. So the questions are coming in from the bottom, usually from a web browser. Somebody clicks on something. Could be a command line. Somebody types SSH in a domain name. Well, that would also be a question. And then the answers are coming in at the top. .be for Belgium has some authority servers that are responsible for answering questions about that part of the DNS namespace. cert.be, ccb.cert.be, farsitesecurity.com, all of these domain names have authority servers. And that is where the content of those domains and the names under them enters the system. Now, sometimes it enters from a text file. That's how I do it. Sometimes it's from a database. Sometimes it's software. So maybe there is no actual authority data. There's just some piece of software that's able to answer those questions. That's how Akamai does it. And it doesn't matter how you do it, but one way or another, you got to look like an authority server because the questions come in at the bottom, the answers come in at the top. Now, where they meet is in the middle, and that is sometimes called a recursive server, sometimes called a full resolver, and it is where all of the complexity, most of the DDoS vulnerability, most of the vulnerabilities overall are all in that, because that's where the complexity is. That thing has the job of answering any question that it may get from the bottom. And to do that, it has to surf the hierarchy above it to go find the name servers that are actually responsible for the data that question is asking for. And that's a complex task. And one of the side effects of that is it builds up what's called a cache. So that if it's answering the same question for more than one stub resolver, like www.google.com turns out to be pretty popular, it is able to reuse the previous answer. It doesn't always have to fetch the answer from the authority network. And that gives rise to the concept of below the recursive and after the and above the recursive. So those stub resolvers where the questions come in are associated with the IP address, the current IP address of some user. Could be your smartphone, could be your laptop, could be a server, a virtual server, whatever that is. The IP address can be associated with a personal identity. And that person could be a European data subject as described in the GDPR literature. And so we call that PII. We say that those questions are innately personally identifiable information because they contain information that can uniquely identify a European data subject, and they contain a statement of that user's intent. like I want to go to Google now would be its intent. So we don't collect that, and we advise you to not collect that either. Or if you do, make sure you're just doing it inside your own company with your own employees, and that the law does not forbid what you plan to do with that data. But we do advise that you collect from above the recursive, because that's just, if somebody needs something that's not in cache, then you've got this server-to-server traffic that's really just trying to put things in cache. And you don't know the end user address at that point. And you don't see reuse events, so you can't really judge popularity. And if you collect in that spot, and then you do some additional anonymization of it, then our judgment is that it is free of GDPR concerns after that type of anonymization, and because it was collected in a place that you can't see the end user's identity. Now, very briefly, my team in the last 10 years has created those two things over on the right. One is called DNS TAP, and this is in all modern name servers. It's just a piece of middleware that you can use to monitor your own name server. And that's how we get the data that is above the recursive. That's the PII free data that I told you about, is generally coming via DNS TAP, although you can get it with BPF. That's the old way. We also created something called response policy zones, and that's where you can instruct your name server to lie about certain things. Like if it's a botnet command and control name, you may want to just not answer for that in order to protect your vulnerable hosts. But that, I'm not going to talk more about protective DNS or DNS firewalls today, just to let you know that we've been working on trying to use DNS to secure other things, and those are two outcomes that might matter. I also want to note there's generally a firewall that keeps your recursive server from being used by anybody other than your own users, and also keeps your own users from using any recursive name server that is not operated by you. That gives you a chance to monitor, let's say, your IoT devices and see which ones are infected with what. A lot of people are frustrated by that firewall, and so the thing on the left has been created, DNS over HTTP, and that is meant to bypass the local name server and pierce the firewall because it's all HTTPS, which is all completely opaque. So the firewall is less effective now than it used to be. So just be aware, this is the modern architecture, and it has a lot of tension in it. So if you wanted to join the SIE Europe project, and I'll give you some motivation for that in a moment, I just want to describe the steps. There's an agreement, you sign that. Generally, it's considered harmless. We don't get a lot of feedback from people's lawyers saying, hey, this is terrible, we can't sign this. You install some software and you configure it, and then you start sending the data to us, SIE Europe, for technical evaluation. And if the data is correct, and it looks like there's enough data, in other words, it's not just my laptop, it's a real name server serving a community, and it has some traffic, then you wait usually 30 days for administrative approval. Eventually you will get an API key from SIE Europe that either lets you see the real-time data or lets you see a passive DNS database. And that database is not, I wouldn't call it commercially viable. It only keeps the last month or two of history. And that's because a number of our data participants are in this business, and they wouldn't like us much if we put them out of business. So what we have is a database that is perfectly usable. It's just not as usable as the commercial ones that are operated in other parts of the world. So 4 quick notes. You can't redistribute this data. You can make derivative works like databases or other things, but you can't redistribute it. If somebody wants this data, they've got to come to SIE Europe and ask for it. There's no fee. This company doesn't sell anything. You can't get the data if you're not a participant. If you're not sending data, you can't get the data. And the whole idea is that each operator gives a little and gets a lot. So how do you identify yourself? Well, you got to be running your own name server. You can't just outsource it to 8888 or 1111 or any of the others. You actually have to operate that software. Now, fortunately, there are some really good open source DNS implementations. I'm affiliated with Bind9 because I was the Bind guy back in the 90s. And I hired the people who wrote Bind9, although I told them they couldn't keep any of my code when they did it. But there are others, Unbound, Qctr, Broward DNS. And chances are you don't need a powerful computer. A Raspberry Pi is more powerful than the biggest name server we had back in the 90s and is perfectly adequate to this task. I run a name server on my laptop, for example, and it does not present much load. But you will have to cross that bridge. You will have to run your own name server, or you cannot collect the data above the recursive, right? If you're using a cloud name server, you don't have any data that's above the recursive because the recursive's in the cloud. Only they have the data that's above the recursive. But anyway, if you're running your own name server, which you should do anyway, because the cloud is a dangerous place and resilience is an issue, as well as privacy, then you install this software. It's completely cooperative, right? We can't force this. If somebody doesn't cooperate, we don't see their traffic. There's no surveillance going on here. And we don't collect PII. And to the extent that some leaks in, we filter it out to make sure it doesn't get into the database. And that's it. It's that simple. Probably the hardest part of this is that you may not be running your own name server. Or if you are, perhaps it's an appliance from some company like BlueCat or Infoblox. But don't give up in that case because those companies are very aware of what we do. They all support DNS TAP, so you'll be okay. Anyway, what can you do with it? I'm going to start out in command line mode because that's what I love. I am fully aware that not everybody loves the command line, and so there is a web browser version of this. I'm also going to demonstrate that. I actually wanted to demonstrate two different web browser methods, but I broke the other one last night, and so now I'm just going to show you the real one and not the experimental one. But first, let's do a little bit of command line work. And what we'll be trying to explore here is these roles. First, what patterns used to be in the DNS until takedown happened. And can you maybe as a threat hunter use the fact that a pattern changed or ended as a sort of a clue? Which ISP could I call who's probably really angry about this customer and therefore would be willing to talk about them? I know that's sneaky, but it works. You can also pivot. Once you have an indicator, which in this case, I mean an IP address, a name server name, a mail server name, a domain name, any of that stuff, how can you find the other related resources in the DNS that share that indicator? Because if they're using, let's say they're hosted at Gmail or GoDaddy or something like that, you won't find anything. It'll be related to almost everything on the internet. But if they have their own ISP, if they are a member of an ISP, or if they've got their own domain names, they run their own mail server, run their own name server, then you can learn about their other DNS resources, which will help you build kind of a forensic fingerprint of their asset cloud. Doesn't tell you their name, but it certainly gives you a lot of other investigative choices. And then finally, I'll talk about investigating online neighborhoods. In other words, what else is hosted in the same place? Because maybe that inventory will give you some idea of the character of their ISP or the character of the domain names that they're using. So let me change what I'm sharing. I'm going to share a terminal window. This one here. Yes, that one. Share. All right. So this is a Linux command line. The things I'm doing also work on BSD. They also work on Mac OS. And with a little bit of work, you can make them work on Windows. The software I'm going to be showing you is open source. It's on GitHub. and we do revise it periodically. It is it's the main demonstration tool for this type of database. And it will also work with some of the other passive DNS systems in the world, such as the one at Circlu in Luxembourg. So, first let's take a look at what I talked about with the time machine. So this is my personal domain name, and I'm going to use it as an example because the results are short and I can explain what they are. I'm not a criminal, but if I were, you'd be able to learn things from this. But you can't learn anything from that, can you? That's just a bunch of gibberish on your screen. What that is new line separated JSON. And so if you want to read it, you got to pretty print that thing. And oops, I don't even have JQ. Huh, interesting. Or you got to turn off JSON mode. That's what the API is returning, but this client is perfectly willing to translate it for you. So let's take a look at this. So these are the mail exchangers, in other words, the mail server that is responsible for hearing mail about my vanity domain, redbarn.org. And I've sorted this in reverse order by the last time that each pattern was seen. So the first one you see ended today. This is today's address because the database is being updated even as I speak, right? It's a continuous update process. And you'll see it started in 2014, which means that this pattern has been in existence for 6 years. But there's something very interesting, which is in the middle of that 6-year period, we had a 1-year period where the pattern was a little bit different, where we had not only the host name of my mail server, but also this other thing. And this was an experiment. This is something that somebody out in the anti-spam world put together. And it didn't help me very much, so I eventually took it out. But this demonstrates something that's very important, which is you could have a very long-lived pattern, 6 years in this case, that has a cutout in the middle of it, and you got to be watching for those cutouts. You got to be able to say, well, I see that in the 2016, Vixie added this other 65535 thing, and then in 2018 he took it out. And then you go further back in time and you'll say, hey, wait, from 2013 to 2014, Vixie had bought property in the Soviet Union. What's that about? Well, I'm a child of the Cold War. I always wanted to own property in the Soviet Union, and I thought it was cool. That's what happened. But if I were a criminal, then the fact that something changed in 2014 might give you a clue about, okay, they changed ISPs. He changed something. Something happened in the life of Vixie that caused him to not be able to use that. And I'll tell you what it was. I forgot to renew the domain. But then you see an even older pattern, which is where from 2010 to 2013, you won't find anything in this database older than 2010. That's when we started building it. But that's 11 years of history. That's a long time. In fact, it may be too much history. And sometimes you have to deliberately say, I only care about stuff in the last year, because otherwise you're overwhelmed. But you can see that back then, I had a .com name. I sold that to buy a Mazda Miata. Sue me anyway. So that's it. That's an example of passive DNS as a time machine. And let me again switch windows. I want to show you what this looks like on the web. We're going to share the screen. We're going to share a window. We're going to share Scout. Okay. Eddie's here. Costin's here. The gang's all here. Wish we were able to go out afterward. Let's do this in person someday soon. All right, so I'm showing you something called Scout. This is running in my browser. You can either download it as a plugin for Mozilla or Firefox, or Mozilla, Firefox, or any Chrome browser. This is a Chrome browser. But there's also a pure JavaScript version if you don't have permission to install plugins, for example. But what you do is you get this, you get an API key, you put the API key into the settings, and then you can make questions. And I'm going to, for demonstration purposes, I want to ask the same question here that I just asked in the command line, because I want you to see sort of what that is going to look like. You've seen what the data looks like as text. Let's take a look at it. as sort of a screenshot. And what you'll see is the same 4 rows. And you see there, the default here is to put the newest one first. So you see the 2021 pattern first. And this is how most people access our database. If not this, then they would access it through Maltego, which has a plugin, or Splunk, which has a plugin, or Anomaly. There are dozens of sort of threat hunting tools or SOC tools that have plugins that work with this database. And so you don't have to learn the command line in order to benefit from this. But there's something that you can do that's kind of cool, which is to click on stuff. So you see that this util.redbarn.org is clickable. You can actually get to it. You can get to other things from here. So let's take a look at its history. What just happened? It doesn't have an MX type, sorry. Host names have addresses, so we need to ask the right question. So now what you see is that in the history of this database, at least from 2014 on, this thing has always had a certain address. And you can click on that too, and that's kind of cool, because then you can find out what else is in the same Class C network. And so you see all of my other host names, because if you're trying to be reachable, either by your family or by the rest of the world, you're going to have an A record in the DNS. And this gives an investigator a whole catalog. They can find out who my friends are and who I offer web services to, so that they don't have to buy them. You can find everything. And in this case, there are at least 15 pages to go through. We're not going to go through them. But I did want to make sure you understand. I'm going to go back to the non-graphical tool now, but I do want to make sure everybody understands. If you don't love the command line as much as I do, have no fear. There are a lot of ways to reach this that don't involve doing what I'm doing here. So I've already shown you how to use an IP address to discover related resources. And what that would look like on the command line is, here's my IP address, 24. Okay, well, in the history of the database, it's only seen one address. But you might want to broaden this and say, yeah, what about the surrounding /24? And that'll work too. And that's pretty good for looking at what we call the network neighborhood, which is, what else is hosted here? If it's a whole bunch of stuff that looks like it was used in counterfeit goods or spam or online child abuse or whatever, then you got to investigate the ISP, because they're probably complicit. If this is an isolated outlier and it doesn't look like there's a whole bunch of other damaging material in the same net block, then you'd say, well, the ISP is probably unaware of what's going on. And to be able to tell the character of the relationship between an investigative target and their ISP from this distance without telling them anything, without making any queries that they will see, is a huge boon. But there are other things you might do. You might say, it's good to know what else Vixie has got in his network, but what else does he have in his domain name? So let's look for redbarn.org. Let's look for all the names under redbarn.org. And there's going to be a lot of them. And so I'm just going to have to type that through a pager. And so, here you go. This is just a long list of everything else that this thing knows about me. So you got a bunch of SOA records, because those change all the time. Let's limit our request to just let's look at the IPv6 records. If somebody wanted to know, has Paul adopted IPv6? The answer is yes. Now, this shows something. There's something going on here that isn't readily apparent. So let me just explain. The default for our API is not sorted. So you're getting this data in completely random order. And if you want it sorted, you've got to do that on the client. So I'm going to sort in reverse order by the last time seen. So we see the newest information first, because the stuff is really old, probably doesn't exist anymore. But again, what you get to see here is, I don't even remember what Bunnies is, but you get a sense that you can learn about all of the other names that I have exposed to the DNS so that resources would be reachable. If I were a criminal, this would give you kind of a good set of next steps to consider in a threat hunt. And that threat hunting could be done by an investigative journalist, law enforcement, which would include national certs. This could be after attack forensics. It could be a lot of things. And so, what you use it for, that's up to you. We just want to make sure that you have access to this data. And if you're in Europe, you can get access to the European data without paying anybody anything. If you contribute, you will get access to a database like this that shows everything that has been witnessed by any of our data participants. And that is, I think, the main driver. That's the main motivator for people to install the software, join SIE Europe, sign the agreement, and contribute data, is that you'll get access to a database like this. So finally, let's do one last pivot, which we'll use the name server, the mail server. And we know that the mail server for Red Barn is called UDL. So let's look at that. But this time, what we want to know is who uses UDL as their name server. As their mail server. It's -N. Sorry, the default is to search by the left-hand name, in other words, the owner of the records. But in this case, I want to search by the right-hand side. I want to know what are all the possible questions that could have resulted in that answer. And so now you get that list. Oops, I forgot to paginate it. And let's get just the MXs and see if we can. Yeah, there you go. So there you have it. There's a list of all the things that have ever used the util as their mail server. Again, I'm not a criminal. At least I hope you all agree I'm not a criminal. But if I were, there's a great inventory of what I've been up to and what I called it. And you might be able to use this to find overlap between the investigation you're in the middle of and some other investigation that somebody else is in the middle of or that they've given up on. And I want to say we are working closely with the MISP community in Luxembourg to make sure there's a plugin for that system to do this type of enrichment also. And that's the end of my prepared remarks. So what I hope is that we'll get some questions. What I'm going to do is put some URLs on the screen because I want you to be able to learn more.
Of course.
So there you go. So Kevin, what now?
Yeah, so thanks a lot for the presentation. Thanks a lot for the demo. I mean, I don't know how many times you use this tool, but nothing seemed to have gone wrong in this demo. So amazing. And doing a live demo like this, that's that shows a lot of power. Now, we have a couple of questions here before we go into the questions I have for you. Now, we have a couple of questions. One is from Corey Baker, which says, well, Dr. Paul, you stated that resilience is an issue when you were talking about DNS. Can you please elaborate what that issue would be?
Sure. One of my early mentors had worked at Xerox PARC, and I met him at Digital Equipment back in the late 80s. And he told me that the definition of a distributed system is that that's what you have if you can't get work done because some computer you've never heard of and can't reach and can't fix is down. That is sadly true. And so, Google's name service 8888 is very popular, but it relies on the routing system, which, Google doesn't have complete control over that. 1111, likewise, that's Cloudflare. They're doing a lot. They've got, services all over the world, but there have been times when 1111 was unreachable to whatever, a whole country or a whole continent. And that's not Cloudflare's fault, although sometimes maybe it was a software bug that got pushed out a little too fast. But it's because that thing in the middle is what I call other people's networks. You can't control those. You can't, so the further away the resources are that you need, the less resilient they're going to seem. And for something like this, where everything you do relies on one or more DNS queries, you really want that to be answered locally, It could be on your network, in your campus, by your ISP, something that has a low probability of being down, and also has a very short latency, right? You'll never reach a metro area name server in less than 15 milliseconds, but if it's on campus, you'll get it in 1 millisecond. And those milliseconds add up if you're doing sort of high performance computing. So all I mean is, don't use the cloud for anything that is easy to run for yourself. Just learn a little bit, go look at, I don't know, the Pi-hole, go look. There are a lot of little Raspberry Pi appliances that do this for you. It's very cheap, very easy to learn. And if you do it, you'll have both more privacy and more uptime.
True. I can say that the Pi-hole runs great here in my own network. I've been using it for a couple of years now. Now, somebody, Alexander Tomare, is asking, how would this compare to a Pi-hole? I don't think we can compare it in this way. This is passive DNS, but
Well, let me relate. So the Pi-hole's principal advantage is that it lets you do filtering of DNS, so that if you've got a vulnerable client population, and frankly, we all have vulnerable client populations, there's no way to know what the supply chain risks for some IoT device, or even for some app that you're running. So if you have that, then what you want to do is make sure that certain questions aren't answered, because if that vulnerable client gets the answer to that, gets an honest answer to that question, bad things will happen. You want to prevent bad things, and so you would do that with DNS filtering. DNS filtering gets a bad name because it's often done by nation states who are trying to avoid regime change. People are marching in the streets, and they're sometimes using the internet to figure out where and when to do that marching. So DNS filtering sounds like a political tool, but at heart, it's not. It can be a feature. The Pi-hole proves it, because people install that deliberately to get DNS filtering, but what they want is transparent DNS filtering that they are in control of. And I think that's wise. So the Pi-hole really just uses your upstream name server and does the filtering locally. So it's not a full recursive server. But if you go to labs.fsi.io and hunt around for the forum, you'll see that we have published a Pi-hole image that is a full recursive name server. And so you can use RPZ, which is a DNS firewall that has quite a bit more power than the native filtering that is inside the Pi-hole by itself. So this relates to the Pi-hole because you probably can't filter if you can't see, because obviously you can't hunt or understand that which you know nothing about. So monitoring is the precursor to filtering. Everybody who's offering filtering is also doing a lot of monitoring in order to figure out what to filter.
True. We need to do some research before we can find out what's bad. That's definitely the case. Well, thank you for answering that. If you can share the link, that would be awesome, to your own Pi-hole project, because I know what to do then this weekend. Not that I
It's
don't.
the second link on your screen.
Oh, it's that one. Awesome. All right, cool.
No, third link. The one that says Farsight Labs will ultimately lead you to labs.fsi.io, and there you'll have to tell us your email address and verify that, and you'll have to agree to receive our newsletter once a month. But beyond that, we don't spam, and there's no fee, and everything you find in there is kind of our gift to the community, including this Pi-hole image.
Okay, awesome. Now, one question that I have for you, Paul, if we're talking about giving your data, giving your DNS monitoring in a way, the sensor from your own network to SI Europe, and getting access to all the data in Europe, all the passive DNS data, how big does your network need to be? Is there like a requirement, or can I even do it from my own home network where I have a sensor running here on my own home network? How does it work?
Your home network, like my home network, probably doesn't qualify. We really need it to be some kind of ISP or university or company that has more than the four people of some family, and that's for reasons of equity, right? If you imagine Deutsche Telekom, who was our launch member, the first signer of this DPA, they've got 25 million or whatever it is users, and they send us a lot of data. And you don't have to be as big as them, but you have to be big enough that I can look those guys in the eyes and say, yes, we are giving your data to Kevin, but we trust Kevin, and Kevin is running a network that is large enough that you, sir, Deutsche Telekom, will be interested in seeing that. You will want this data, and you will not be uncomfortable trading the visibility of your data for the visibility of theirs. I have to be able to make that statement. It's just a litmus test. And so virtually any university or ISP qualifies. Most enterprises qualify. Government agencies qualify, but of course they don't like to share anything. But yeah, as a home user, you probably don't qualify.
All right. Well, thanks for that answer. We have another question from Guido. Is there a way to prevent criminals from joining and seeing what you could know about them with passive DNS?
That's what do you do with the insider attack? So first off, we don't take on the internet. I guess nobody knows if you're a dog, but we really do need to know the identity of who wants to join us. So you don't just fill this out on the web and click through a CAPTCHA and suddenly you've got a key. It doesn't work that way. And so if a criminal joins and somehow fools us into thinking that they are a legitimate ISP or a legitimate enterprise or something like that, and they're able to feed us data during the technical evaluation that looks, good and so forth, then yes, they would be able to see what we know about them, with the understanding that we will catch them and we will stop them. But we make the bar high enough that criminals don't want to do the things I just said, because yes, there would be some benefit to them in knowing what do we know about them, but the cost to receive that benefit is simply too high. It's not justified by the smallness of that benefit.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for that answer. I have one more demo question for you. I don't know if it will work, but let's see. So I'll put in the chat a link. I don't know if you can capture that. So don't click it. Everybody, don't click the link.
Don't click the link. Never click the link.
So this was a link that was used in the Flubot campaign. So as a mass smishing campaign here in Belgium. And it was used, to distribute the whole Flubot, all the Flubot malware to Android people, to people using Android. So I don't know if you can find the infrastructure behind this, if we can find whatever is related to this domain.
Well, let's take a look. So I've switched back to the command line. Hopefully that's visible. I found a way to copy paste that without clicking on it. And here I'm just going to look for the subdomains. In other words, the longer names that end in dot thing that you said. Well, there's definitely some stuff in there. Let's look. Oh, wow. They also use the Soviet Union for hosting. That is so cool that part of the Soviet Union isn't dead. So I can do all sorts of pivots, but I think what I want to do is just run it, sort it. So I see the newest stuff first and page it. So yeah, today's set of address records, and you'll see these are funny ones. The count is 1 on all of these, and the duration is 1 second, right? This was a single query or a single response that we only saw one time. And so what you'll see is they're rotating through a lot of different addresses. Mm-hmm. I don't even see any overlap between this set and the next set.
That set, no, I don't see anything.
And so sometimes when you see this, what you're actually looking at is a covert channel, a DNS tunnel of some kind, where the answer encodes some bit of information that only they would understand how to decode. And I'm seeing an awful lot of this. But it can also be a load balancer. It may be that this really is in a lot of places, and so you want to give every questioner their own copy of an answer. I'm betting that the time to live field on this is low, so it doesn't sit in cache for long. But if we get past all of that, holy cats, goes on and on.
It's really
What you'll see is that yesterday we actually saw this pattern 12 times over a period of 4 minutes. And here's one we saw 4 times over a period of 7 seconds. So addresses may not be exactly what you need, but let's take a look at one of the addresses. I'll just pick this one at random because I want to show you what happens if you pivot.
Yep.
So we're asking an IP address question, and we want to know, again, let's sort by time last seen. I really hope nobody is sort of unwilling to forgive me for doing a command line demo, but you know, this to me is reality, and everything else is to me kind of a blue pill. Or the red pill. Anyway, so here are all the different domain names that we have seen using that address. In other words, one of the addresses that is returned for your guy, which is this EWA thing, is also returned for this one and this one and this one and so forth. So if you want to know what the infrastructure is, you probably need to investigate these other names as well, because they're probably a related botnet that just happens to use the same command and control.
Yeah.
This one in particular looks very similar to the one that you gave me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, and this is all based on passive DNS data that different companies give for free to just receive it.
That's the goal. We want everybody to be able to work like I'm working here. But we need help. This database can only exist if people run sensors, which of course means you got to run your own server, but a lot of people do. So, you know, I really urge anybody who wants to help me, but you don't care about the database for yourself, you can still help your own security and the world's security by making your data available. But once you've done that, you should really get yourself an API key and learn to work this way, because it is a superpower.
This is indeed a superpower. And I always pivot when I see this thing on the command line. I start doing, going into this, I suddenly see there's like a lot of domains related to this one IP. I tend to go into a graphical view, and I tend to use things like Multigo, which you have an integration for. I don't know if you have any other integrations for tools that people might use.
I mentioned Splunk. I mentioned Anomaly. I mentioned MISP.
Of course.
But, there's a web page that has all of that information. And somebody comes in and says, look, I've got this, thing of this tool that I use in my SOC. Can you make a plugin for that? Well, chances are we can, or chances are you can. I can tell you that we have as customers a number of national law enforcement agencies around the world, including in Europe. And these folks inevitably write their own tool chains. They have their own workflow, their own case management, and they want to do enrichment. And, who knows, maybe their workflow is written in PHP or Perl or Python or whatever it is. I use Golang, but not everybody does. Doesn't matter. This is a very simple API, and it poses no integration challenge if what you have is private software that you need to adapt to use this. And to demonstrate that point, I've installed JQ, and I just want to show you. JQ dot. There we go.
Yeah, we're all JSON here.
So what you're seeing here is the actual JSON blobs, new line separated, that come back from the API server. But this time I've pretty printed them, so you can get some sense of, if you wanted to write your own software to do this, it's probably one screen of code. In fact, this has been done in the Bourne shell with the curl command.
True. I'm more of a Python user. I just like snakes. That's who I am.
I won't discourage you. Whatever gives you power in the world, you should get there.
All right, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks a lot, Paul. I see that Pedro has arrived, which means we are out of time for questions. Or can we do one more question, Pedro?
One more.
One more. All right. Is Elasticsearch an option? the Elasticsearch stack?
So there is an ELK stack that does passive DNS. It's been presented at First TC a couple of times. It's on GitHub. I don't know the name of it. We found that it doesn't, we're DNS people at heart. I come from a DNS background. I've got the inventor of DNS is on my board of directors. And so I care about things in the DNS and how it works, how it holds together technically, more than perhaps I should. I might even seem a little bit psychotic about this, but I can't get the correctness I need from the Elasticsearch method. So it's a good thing to do if what you have is your own name server. You don't want to share this data with anybody else. You just want to put it into something so you can get some idea of what your users have seen. I think the ELK stack is fine for that. But really for something, well, as an example, in the US, we receive about 330,000 cache misses per second from a global network of sensors installed just right next to recursive name servers. The ELK stack doesn't keep up well at those volumes, in addition to not having the DNS style of correctness that I need. Yeah. So we don't use it, but I won't discourage others from at least, explore it, learn about it, and then maybe get yourself a key somehow and compare your results from what you can build from open source versus what you can get from us.
Well, thanks a lot, Paul. Thank you for your insights. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Paul. I really hope that you were able to convince a lot of people here in our audience to support this fantastic project that helps a lot for cybersecurity. Let me know if people reached out to you, if you can measure the return investment here. It's always a pleasure to hear about that. And certainly in the near future, we will certainly discuss it among us. It means you, Kevin, what else CCB can do to support your project. Yeah. Paul, thank you very much. Have a great day. And I hope that we will meet again soon in real time. Who knows, maybe in December. Okay.
I hope so. Thank you again for having me.
All right. Thanks a lot, Paul. See you next time.
Okay. 20 minutes past 5. We have reached the end of this quarterly event. Fortunately, a little setback this time, a technical setback, but okay. Paul has came to the rescue to save the rest of the Qctr. Fortunately, everything went very well during his live demo. I'm always afraid of live demos, but okay. We can conclude that once again it was a very interesting Qctr. I want to thank all our guest speakers for being with us and bringing and sharing their knowledge with us. And thank you for being here. And I hope you have enjoyed it and have some takeaways for even more and better cybersecurity. Thank you very much and hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you next time, everyone.